Johnny Carson reigned over late-night television from 1962 to 1992, and getting a spot on The Tonight Show was a golden ticket for entertainers. But Carson was also known for his mercurial temper and long memory for slights. Over the decades, several celebrities, through on-air antics, personal feuds, or breaches of Carson's trust, found themselves officially banned or informally blacklisted from Carson's guest list. Here are 17 guests Johnny Carson banned from The Tonight Show, and the surprising reasons why. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers used to be one of Johnny Carson's favorite guest hosts, but their relationship fell apart after she made a big career decision. Rivers first appeared on The Tonight Show in 1965, and Carson took her under his wing. Over the course of 2 decades, she became a frequent guest and the show's top substitute host, widely viewed as Carson's likely successor. However, in 1986, Rivers accepted an offer from Fox to launch her own competing late-night show. Critically, she didn't inform Carson beforehand. When the news broke, he felt betrayed and refused to take her calls, cutting her off completely. Rivers believed Carson's reaction was rooted in both ego and sexism, saying he viewed her success as his property. Carson not only banned her from The Tonight Show, but warned that guests appearing on her Fox program would be blacklisted from his. This ultimatum crippled Rivers' new show from the outset, as big names avoided it. Even after her husband and producer, Edgar Rosenberg, died by suicide, Carson remained silent. He enforced the ban until his 1992 retirement, and Jay Leno honored it out of respect. Rivers never stopped lamenting the rift. She wasn't invited back until 2014 under Jimmy Fallon's hosting, a poignant return just months before her death. Their falling out remains one of television's most notorious feuds. Rich Little. Rich Little was a beloved impressionist known for his spot on celebrity impersonations, including Johnny Carson himself. Throughout the 1970s, Little was a regular on variety shows and filled in as Tonight Show guest host a dozen times. Audiences loved his accurate and hilarious take on Carson, and for a while, Carson played along, even featuring Little in skits. But the admiration didn't last. According to Little's memoir, Carson began to resent the frequent parodies. Though Carson never confronted him publicly, Little believes he was blacklisted for mocking the host too often. By 1982, he stopped getting invitations to appear, and it became clear something had shifted. Carson's team gave vague explanations, saying Little's act had gone stale, but behind-the-scenes accounts suggested Carson's pride was wounded. There was never an official announcement, just a quiet disappearance from The Tonight Show. Little moved on to other gigs, even portraying Carson in HBO's The Late Shift in 1996, a subtle act of defiance. In interviews, he expressed disappointment over being frozen out without explanation, but remained sure it was the Carson impersonation that crossed the line. He never returned while Carson was host, only making appearances during Jay Leno's era. Little's quiet removal shows how swiftly Carson could pull strings. Without drama, just decisive exclusion. Charles Grodin. The line between shtick and offense was razor thin on Johnny Carson's stage, and Charles Grodin crossed it without even realizing. Known for his intentionally aloof and needling humor, Grodin's appearances on The Tonight Show could feel more like comic standoffs than casual chats. But that was part of his charm. His deadpan delivery, honed in films like Heaven Can Wait, thrived on awkward tension. Unfortunately, Carson wasn't always in on the joke. One night, Grodin made a casual jab about being left out of Carson's private poker games. Meant to be playful, it instead hit a nerve. Carson, guarded about his personal life, took it as a breach of trust. According to biographer Lawrence Leamer, that offhand comment was all it took to earn Grodin an unspoken but very real ban from the show. There was no fallout, no headline-making feud, just silence. Grodin's invitation stopped, and The Tonight Show door quietly closed. He went on to build a strong rapport with David Letterman, whose edgier platform was a better fit for Grodin's off-kilter style. In the end, Grodin's ban revealed a truth about Carson. Jokes were fine, but not at his expense, especially if they pulled back the curtain on his private world. Even a hint of discomfort could be enough to get you cut. Barbra Streisand. Barbra Streisand didn't need The Tonight Show. She was already a phenomenon. Broadway star, chart-topping singer, and rising film actress by the time she sat across from Johnny Carson in the 1960s. But she did appear, twice, and then nothing. So what happened? According to Carson's biographers, Streisand canceled a planned appearance at the last minute, and her reason didn't sit well with Johnny. He wasn't just annoyed, he was insulted. Carson prided himself on punctuality, professionalism, and a sense of decorum. When someone flaked on him, especially a guest of Streisand's caliber, he viewed it as a personal slight. As a result, Streisand was quietly banned from the show. No on-air drama, no press release, just an invisible line she wasn't invited to cross again. Years later, the ban was lifted. She performed via satellite in 1969 and made a surprise cameo in 1972. But the years in between tell a clear story. Even the brightest stars weren't immune to Carson's grudges. Streisand didn't make a fuss, and Carson didn't explain. But insiders knew she was iced out, not for scandal or insult, but simply for canceling without a good enough reason. In Carson's world, it wasn't just about talent. It was about respect. And if he felt you didn't show it, you didn't show up. Lola Falana. Lola Falana was never told she had done anything wrong. That's because she hadn't. In the early 80s, the singer-dancer-actress was quietly blacklisted from The Tonight Show, not for any misstep or controversy, but because she was friends with the wrong person. That person? Wayne Newton. Carson and Newton had long clashed, with Johnny's monologues repeatedly jabbing at Newton's masculinity and rumored mob connections. Their tension peaked in 1980 when Newton outbid Carson to buy the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The rivalry turned bitter. And Carson didn't just stop at banning Newton, he extended that grudge to anyone in Newton's circle. Lola Falana, who had enjoyed a warm, on-air rapport with Carson, was one of the casualties. Her manager received word in 1981 that she was no longer welcome on the show. The reason? Her close association with Newton. Falana never returned to Carson's couch. She continued to shine elsewhere, on Vegas stages and other television spots, but the Carson snub stung. For her, the blacklist was confusing and cruel, an erasure not based on merit or behavior, but proximity. Her story remains one of the clearest examples of Carson's quiet wrath. He didn't need a confrontation. Just one phone call, and a career opportunity could disappear overnight. Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton and Johnny Carson were once cordial, even frequent collaborators. Newton appeared on The Tonight Show roughly 30 times in the 60s and 70s. But everything changed in 1980 when the two vied for ownership of Las Vegas's Aladdin Hotel. Newton won the bid. Carson lost and took it personally. Almost overnight, Newton vanished from Carson's guest list. Then came the digs. Carson ramped up the jokes, lacing his monologues with cheap shots about Newton's masculinity and alleged mob ties. For Newton, it wasn't funny. It was defamation. He stormed into NBC's Burbank offices and demanded Carson stop. Carson, notorious for hating confrontation, eased up slightly, but the damage was done. Newton sued NBC for one particularly nasty joke, and any remaining goodwill evaporated. By the late 80s, their feud was common knowledge. Newton accused Carson of trying to ruin his name, while Carson excluded Newton from even his farewell tribute reel in 1992. Guests close to Newton, like Lola Falana, were blacklisted too. The grudge never healed. Newton thrived in Vegas, but he remained banished from Carson's kingdom. If you ever needed proof that Johnny held a grudge like no one else in television, Wayne Newton's exile was the gold standard. Charo. Not every ban came with fireworks. Some were quiet, almost invisible like Charo's. In the mid-1970s, Charo was everywhere. Late-night shows, game shows, variety hours. With her heavy accent, electric personality, and coochie coochie catchphrase, she became a familiar figure in American pop culture. On The Tonight Show, she brought energy, music, and playful flirtation. But Carson wasn't charmed for long. There was no explosive incident, no scandal. Just a slow fade. By the end of the decade, Charo had been quietly erased from Carson's guest lineup. According to crew accounts and biographers, Johnny didn't enjoy interviewing her. He found her persona hard to engage with, her broken English tough to respond to, and her energy overwhelming. Off-air, he allegedly lumped her in with guests he called NBC's hired mermaids, people he felt were ratings bait but not real conversationalists. Though she popped up once or twice in the early 80s, possibly under guest hosts or producer insistence, Charo was never truly welcomed back by Carson himself. For Charo, the ban wasn't a career ender. She kept performing and poked fun at her TV ubiquity, but being iced out from The Tonight Show during its golden era stung. Carson, with his taste for subtlety and control, had simply decided the act was too loud, the language barrier too high. The door closed quietly, and it never reopened. Rip Taylor. Rip Taylor, the flamboyant comic known for his explosive energy and signature confetti toss, was once a frequent guest on American talk shows, including The Tonight Show. His outrageous delivery, glittery props, and slapstick chaos earned laughs in the 60s and 70s. But Johnny Carson, over time, stopped laughing. By 1980, Rip Taylor was on Carson's informal no-book list. Not for anything he did wrong, no scandal, no on-air disaster, but because Carson had grown weary of the chaos. Rip's comedy disrupted the flow, turned interviews into spectacles, and often left the set in a literal mess. Carson preferred smooth rhythm, witty exchanges, and conversational flow. Rip. He tossed glitter mid-sentence. As the years went on, Taylor vanished from Carson's lineup. Unlike other performers, Rip wasn't considered essential. No official ban was announced, he was just never invited again. Still, insiders knew the score. Carson didn't care for the shtick. Rip Taylor took it in stride, even joking in later years about being too wild for Johnny. And after Carson's retirement, he returned for cameo bits under Jay Leno. But during Carson's reign, Rip was shut out. It wasn't personal, it was aesthetic. The king of confetti had too much sparkle for Johnny's tightly lit spotlight. The Hudson brothers. Not all bans stemmed from scandal, some were simply a matter of taste. The Hudson brothers, Bill, Mark, and Brett, were a musical comedy trio who gained brief fame in the 1970s through Billboard hits and their own variety shows, including the Hudson Brothers Razzle Dazzle Show. Their act, a mix of slapstick, pop tunes, and boyish humor, earned them a couple of Tonight Show appearances during their rise. But Carson, who valued professionalism and chemistry with his guests, reportedly found the brothers' style grating and immature. Details remain vague, but by 1980, the Hudson brothers were named in press reports as figures Carson did not care for. Rumors swirled that the brothers, riding high on their TV success, had been too casual or disruptive during tapings. Others speculated their antics simply clashed with Carson's increasingly refined vision for the show. Whatever the reason, Carson added them to his informal blacklist, quietly and without public commentary. Their absence became noticeable. A 1980 Associated Press article casually grouped them among those unwelcome on The Tonight Show, indicating it was common knowledge within the industry. Though the Hudsons returned to other ventures, Carson's platform was no longer available to them. For acts on the bubble, Carson's approval was often the difference between staying power and fading fast. The Hudson brothers fell on the wrong side of that divide. Dana Carvey. Things were going well, until the parody felt a little too real. Dana Carvey became a household name through Saturday Night Live, where his impressions of political figures and celebrities, including Johnny Carson, earned critical acclaim. He made several appearances on The Tonight Show, and his early Carson impersonation drew laughs, even from Johnny himself. But in 1991, SNL aired a sketch called Carsenio, parodying Carson as an aging host trying desperately to emulate Arsenio Hall's youthful style. The satire, while cleverly executed, struck a nerve. Carson reportedly hated the sketch, viewing it as a personal attack that portrayed him as outdated and out of touch. The tension deepened when Carvey repeated the impression live during a Tonight Show segment. That, by many accounts, was the breaking point. Carvey was quietly benched after that appearance. When Wayne's World became a box office hit in 1992, Carson still refused to let him on to promote it, a calculated snub during what should have been a career milestone. Insiders confirmed Carson was punishing Carvey, and his absence from the final Carson-era specials was telling. Though the ban ended when Carson retired, the fallout lingered. Carvey later expressed sadness over disappointing a hero, but acknowledged that generational satire is inevitable. Unfortunately, Carson wasn't known for turning the other cheek, especially when the joke was at his expense. Dick Shawn. Dick Shawn, a revolutionary comedian and actor, was known for his surreal, high-concept routines and unorthodox performances. Whether playing the outrageous LSD in The Producers or faking his own death on stage, Shawn thrived in absurdity. While he made occasional appearances on The Tonight Show during the 60s, Carson ultimately decided Shawn's brand of chaos didn't fit his show's tone. According to former Tonight Show staff, Carson simply couldn't connect with performers like Shawn. Though audiences may have laughed, Carson found his unpredictable style difficult to manage, and even harder to interview. With a strong preference for polished, banter-ready comedians, Johnny opted to quietly stop booking Sean by the early 1970s. The ban was never formal, but it was firm. Sean's name appeared in internal memos and press commentaries as one of the many guests Carson avoided. Unlike comics such as Bob Newhart or Jerry Seinfeld, whose material invited structured conversation, Sean's absurdism offered no such comfort zone. Though Dick Shawn continued performing in theaters and films, his absence from The Tonight Show arguably limited his mainstream exposure. When he died on stage in 1987, many remembered his eccentric brilliance, but few connected him with late-night success. Carson's quiet veto had helped shape that outcome. Jack Carter. There was no misunderstanding. Jack Carter knew exactly why he wasn't welcome on The Tonight Show. A pioneering comedian and early variety host, Carter had a successful run in the 1950s and 60s, even guest hosting The Tonight Show briefly before Johnny Carson took over. But what followed was a simmering rivalry that turned into open hostility. Carter, often loud and sharp-tongued, made no secret of his belief that he deserved the Tonight Show hosting gig. Over the years, he criticized Carson in public interviews, called him humorless, and helped promote Carson's competitors like Joey Bishop. Carson, who rarely responded publicly to such digs, retaliated in the way he knew best. He stopped inviting Carter altogether. According to a 1980 insider list, Carter was among the entertainers Carson couldn't communicate with, a euphemism for personal dislike. His brash vaudeville-influenced style also clashed with Carson's more controlled sensibilities. The result? A complete freeze-out. Carter never appeared on The Tonight Show during Carson's 30-year run, an astonishing omission given his stature in comedy. Carter later admitted the bad blood remained to the end. When Carson passed away in 2005, Carter told reporters he was a great talent but a lousy human being. The exclusion was more than professional, it was deeply personal, and Carson made sure that grudge was permanent. Rona Barrett. The moment Rona Barrett stepped into the world of celebrity gossip, she stepped out of Johnny Carson's favor. Barrett was a trailblazer in televised entertainment journalism during the 1970s, delivering behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories to mainstream audiences. But her probing style and frequent reports on Carson's private life, divorces, dating, and social habits didn't sit well with the notoriously private host. Carson saw her work not as reporting, but as invasion. The fallout wasn't subtle. Carson implemented an unspoken but ironclad policy. No gossip columnists on The Tonight Show. Barrett, Army Archerd, Liz Smith, none were invited. In one particularly awkward moment, Barrett asked Carson personal questions during an interview. He visibly bristled and later ensured she'd never be on again, unless NBC forced his hand. Even then, he kept interactions icy. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly used NBC's legal team to limit Barrett's use of Tonight Show content in her own broadcasts. And when Joan Rivers hired Barrett for her rival late-night program in 1986, it only deepened Carson's ire. The ban stood as a boundary. The Tonight Show wasn't a tabloid platform, and Carson ensured it stayed that way. In an industry that often rewarded gossip with airtime, Johnny Carson made it clear, if your career depended on digging dirt, you wouldn't get a seat on his stage. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase never formally joined Johnny Carson's blacklist, but the silence spoke volumes. At the peak of his Saturday Night Live success in 1975, Chase was hailed as television's next big star. Media outlets even floated him as a potential Tonight Show successor. But in one fateful interview, Chase joked he'd never be tied down interviewing TV personalities every night, a clear jab at Carson's career. Johnny took offense. Privately, Carson dismissed Chase as arrogant and overrated. Publicly, he delivered a scathing one-liner. He couldn't ad-lib a fart after a baked bean dinner. That line, quoted widely, made it obvious that Carson didn't think much of Chase's talents, particularly as a host. For more than a decade, Chase's name was missing from the Tonight Show guest list, despite a flourishing film career. While, as other SNL alumni were welcomed, Murray, Murphy, Belushi, Chase was conspicuously absent. He made a single 1977 appearance and didn't return until 1989, when Fletch Lives was released. Even then, the warmth was noticeably lacking. Chase eventually acknowledged the coolness, admitting that he and Johnny never clicked. And when Chase's own late-night show flopped in 1993, many in the industry remembered his earlier hubris, and Carson undoubtedly took satisfaction in the irony. Respect was non-negotiable for Johnny Carson. Chevy Chase, whether knowingly or not, learned that the hard way. Oliver Reed. It wasn't a ban announced in anger, it was a quiet, final decision, made the moment chaos hit Carson's stage. British actor Oliver Reed was known for his commanding screen presence and his equally infamous off-screen antics. A regular in films like Oliver and Women in Love, Reed's heavy drinking and unpredictable behavior made his talk show appearances in the UK legendarily erratic. So, when he was booked on The Tonight Show in October 1975, alongside Shelley Winters, producers likely hoped for drama, but not a disaster. Instead, they got both. Reed, visibly intoxicated, launched into a chauvinistic rant about women's roles in society. Winters, a vocal feminist, was incensed. Mid-interview, she stood up and dumped her glass of whiskey over Reed's head. Carson, frozen in disbelief, watched the scene unravel live. There was no punchline, just real raw confrontation. The next night, Carson offered a rare public apology to viewers. Behind the scenes, Reed was added to the show's informal blacklist. His actions had triggered everything Carson hated: loss of control, real conflict, and damage to the show's reputation. Reed never returned. Winters, however, did. Carson recognized her outburst as a stand for principle, not a breach of decorum. But Reed's drunken chaos had crossed the line, and Carson closed the door firmly behind him. Uri Geller. Johnny Carson didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He just changed the rules and waited. In 1973, psychic performer Uri Geller was booked on The Tonight Show at the height of his fame. Known for mind-bending spoons and keys, Geller claimed psychic powers that dazzled the public. But Carson, an accomplished magician and skeptic, suspected sleight of hand, not supernatural ability. Before taping, he quietly enlisted magician James Randi to prepare controlled conditions. Spoons and items pre-selected by Carson's team, untouched by Geller beforehand. On air, Geller faltered. The spoons wouldn't bend, nothing moved. Visibly nervous, he blamed a lack of energy. But the message was clear. Without props or setup, the act failed. Carson remained courteous, but he never invited Geller back. In interviews, Geller later acknowledged the appearance had made him famous. Yet, from Carson's perspective, it proved Geller a fraud. Carson refused to give a platform to anyone he believed deceived the public under the guise of mysticism. While Geller's career continued, he was permanently excluded from Carson's stage. The host's loyalty to reason and his quiet alliance with Randi underscored his intolerance for charlatans. For Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show spotlight was sacred, and if you stood beneath it claiming powers you didn't possess, he would expose you and never offer that stage again. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was one of the biggest stars of the 20th century, an icon whose fame spanned music, film, and American culture itself. He had appeared on The Tonight Show several times in the early years, sometimes even sitting in as a guest host. Carson respected Sinatra's status, but their relationship eventually cooled, and Frank was quietly blacklisted from the show. The exact reasons for this are layered in hearsay and discretion, much like many of Carson's bands, but several credible theories have emerged over the years. One factor often cited is Carson's discomfort with Sinatra's well-documented ties to organized crime. While never proven in court, Sinatra's associations with known mob figures were no secret, and Carson, ever image-conscious and concerned about the credibility of his show, allegedly wanted to distance himself from any guest who might bring controversy or scrutiny. Another rumored source of tension was personal friction. Sinatra was famously prickly, used to being in control, and not the type to laugh along unless the joke suited him. Carson, who valued sharp timing and rapport, likely found it difficult to engage Sinatra in the kind of light, improvisational banter he preferred with guests. According to some former staffers, Sinatra's energy just didn't blend well with the increasingly polished, comedic rhythm of The Tonight Show during the 1980s. Whatever the reason, Sinatra was eventually phased out. He was never publicly banned, but the invitations stopped coming. For a star of Sinatra's caliber to vanish from Carson's couch was noticeable, and industry insiders understood what it meant. It was yet another example of Carson's quiet but firm hand in shaping his show's culture. Even someone as powerful and revered as Frank Sinatra wasn't immune to being shut out if Carson decided he didn't belong in the Tonight Show lineup. Thanks for watching. Johnny Carson may have seemed like the genial king of late night, but his guest list tells another story, one shaped by loyalty, boundaries, and the rare sting of rejection. If you found this glimpse into vintage television drama compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.